My wife's son pushed me at the Thanksgiving table. "This table belongs to my dad now. You don't belong here." I fell to the ground in front of everyone. Gravy soaked my shirt. My father's watch shattered on the marble floor. But that wasn't the worst part. That night I discovered a secret much bigger than that. By the next morning, everything had changed. I had evidence, I had proof, and I was done protecting a family that tried to destroy me. When Brandon woke up, his phone started ringing. 43 missed calls. The law was coming. Welcome everyone to our story. If you enjoy it, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment telling us where you're watching from. Before we begin, please note that this story includes a few fictional elements not real, added to make it more engaging and for educational purposes. Any similarities to real people or places are purely coincidental, but the message of the story is completely true. My name is James Morrison, and I hit the floor in front of my whole family on Thanksgiving Eve, gravy soaking into my shirt, my father's ancient wooden table smeared with food, my hips screaming from the impact. Brandon had shoved me, not a playful nudge, a real shove. 2 hands to my chest, and I went down hard. The room went silent. Christmas lights blinked in the window. Forks hung suspended in midair. I stared up at Brandon's half-smile and waited for Rachel to say my name like it mattered, like I mattered. She didn't. Instead, she grabbed napkins and started blotting the gravy off the hardwood like the spill was the problem. Not the man on the floor, not her son's cruelty, just the mess. That was the moment something inside me went cold. Not rage, I've felt rage before. This was different. This was something final. Something that doesn't come back. I pushed myself up on one hand. The hardwood was cold under my palm. My dignity burned hotter than my bruised hip. I looked at Rachel one more time, waiting for anything, a word, an apology, a sign that she understood what had just happened. She kept her eyes on the floor. So I stood slow and steady, swallowing the pain, and I walked out into the Iowa cold without saying a single word. My truck door shut with a hollow thump that echoed across the parking lot. I sat there in the darkness for a long time, hands locked on the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping me together. Behind the restaurant windows, I could still see the table. People were moving again. Someone was laughing a sound that felt like a lie. The porch light threw a weak yellow circle over the snow, and I watched it like I was watching another man's life. That night, sitting alone in my truck, I thought about my father. Henry Morrison wasn't a wealthy man. He was a working man, the kind who built things with his own hands, and believed that a man's name was the only currency that mattered. When I was a kid, he ran a small restaurant out of a converted garage. Nothing fancy, just good food and honest work. He'd spend 14-hour days there, and every night he'd come home smelling like onions and perseverance. There was a wooden table in that first restaurant, old oak worn smooth by years of elbows and coffee cups. The wood had darkened in some places, lightened in others. There were scratches and stains that told stories the day someone spilled red wine, the morning a kid carved his initials when nobody was looking, the 1,000 small moments of a life being lived. When my father got sick, he'd sit at that table by the window and watch the parking lot like he was waiting for someone to come home. After he passed, I couldn't leave that table behind. It felt like leaving a piece of him to rot. So I took it. I hauled it into my garage, tightened the joints, stained it walnut, and repatted the seat with my own hands. It took me 6 months. My back ached every night, my fingers were raw from sanding, and more than once I wanted to quit, but I didn't. Because working on that table felt like saving him, like if I could just restore this one thing, I could preserve something real. When Rachel and I got married, I brought that table into her split level like it belonged there. For years on holidays, it sat at the head of the table, not because I demanded it, but because that's where the host sits. That's what I was raised to believe, and I had been hosting more than anyone liked to admit. 2 summers ago, I used a chunk of my savings to redo Rachel's kitchen. Solid cabinets, a new faucet, better lighting. Nothing flashy, just decent craftsmanship. Rachel cried when she saw it. "And now I can have family over without being embarrassed," she said. I believed her. I thought I was building something. Then Brandon came to me 6 months ago with a proposal. He wanted $50,000 to open a restaurant. He had plans, projections, the whole 9 yards. Part of me understood the hunger, I'd felt it myself. But another part of me saw the risk. I'd failed before my first success. I knew what it felt like to lose everything. "I can't do it, Brandon," I told him. "I've been where you want to go, and I know the odds." He didn't understand. He thought I was trying to control him. He didn't realize I was trying to protect him from the education I'd already paid for in blood and sleepless nights. Sitting in that truck that Thanksgiving night, I understood something I'd been avoiding. That table wasn't just wood and stain. It was my father's voice telling me to be careful. It was his insistence that your name is everything, your word, your integrity, your reputation. Those things don't come back once you lose them. And now I understood why I'd said no to Brandon. Because that table represented everything my father taught me about being a man. About working for what you want. About not asking for handouts when you should be learning. About understanding that some lessons can only be learned through struggle. That table was my father's voice in physical form. Sitting in the darkness, watching the restaurant lights through the snowfall, I didn't know yet what was coming. I didn't know about the loans, the forged signatures, the carefully orchestrated betrayal that had already been set in motion weeks before that night. All I knew was that something had shifted inside me. All I knew was that I'd been living in a house with people who didn't see me. And all I knew was that somehow in 6 months, I would understand exactly how deep that blindness ran. Let me take you back 15 years. I was a different man then, hungrier, angrier, more willing to bleed for something that couldn't bleed back. My first marriage had fallen apart, like most things built on the wrong foundation. No kids involved. Just a lot of silence and the slow realization that we wanted different things. By the time the divorce papers were signed, I was ready to stop wanting anything at all except work. So that's what I did. I spent every waking hour building a restaurant from nothing. I'm not talking about some trendy place where you eat off slate and the portions are small enough to fit in your palm. I'm talking about a real restaurant, the kind where a man can sit down and feel like he's home, where the food tastes like someone actually gives a damn. Those 15 years were brutal. I worked 70-hour weeks. My hands were always cut or burned. My back ached from standing on concrete floors, my knees from climbing on and off step stools to reach things on high shelves. I learned everything: how to manage inventory, how to negotiate with suppliers, how to read a ledger and know when you were going to survive the month or not. I failed twice before I got it right. Twice I thought I'd lost everything. Twice I climbed back up. But I did it. By the time I was 50, I had something real. A restaurant that mattered. A name that meant something in this town. I was content with solitude. I'd made my peace with it. I genuinely believed I'd be alone for the rest of my life, and I'd stopped fighting it. Then Rachel walked in one Tuesday evening, and everything changed. She came in with her sister. I remember because it was slow that night, and I was doing inventory in the back. One of my staff told me there was a woman out front asking to speak to the owner. I almost didn't go. I was covered in sweat and flour. But something made me walk out there. Rachel was sitting at the bar, a glass of wine in front of her. Her eyes moving around the restaurant like she was reading a story. When she saw me, she smiled. Not the smile people give you when they're being polite. A real smile. The kind that comes from somewhere honest. "I heard about this place," she said. "I wanted to see if the rumors were true." "What rumors?" I asked. that the owner cares more about the food than the money. We talked for 3 hours that night. She told me about her ex-husband, a man who'd never really been present even when he was standing in the room. She told me about Brandon, her son, and how hard she'd worked to raise him alone. She told me about the dreams she'd had and the ones she'd given up on. I told her about my restaurant, about the losses and the small victories, about the man I used to be and the man I'd become through sheer stubbornness. We dated for 2 years before I asked her to marry me. I wasn't in a hurry. I'd learned that lesson the first time around, but I also knew that what we had was different. Rachel didn't need me to be perfect. She just needed me to be present, and I could do that. I was good at showing up. When we got married, it wasn't a big production. Small ceremony, close friends, nothing fancy. But when I brought that wooden table into her split-level house, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. I felt like I was building something that might actually last. Brandon was 14 then, tall for his age, still figuring out who he was going to be. Rachel asked me to be careful with him. "He's had a lot of men come and go," she said. "He's learned not to trust." I understood that. So I didn't push. I didn't try to force a father-son relationship. I just showed up. I taught him basics: how to fix a leaky faucet, how to change oil in a car, how to talk to people like they mattered. I invited him to work at the restaurant sometimes, not as punishment, but as something real. He was good with customers. He had a natural charm. Years passed. Brandon got older. He started spending time at the restaurant on his own, not because I asked him to, but because he wanted to. We'd grab coffee before service. We'd talk about stupid stuff, sports girls, the state of the world. It wasn't the connection I'd expected when I married his mother. It was something quieter, something that grew slowly, like a tree taking root. By the time Brandon turned 30, I honestly believed we'd become something close to real family. Not the kind you're born into, but the kind you build. I thought Rachel had finally found stability. I thought Brandon had finally found someone who wouldn't disappear on him. For the first time in a very long time, I thought I had a real family. I had no idea what was coming to take it all apart. Then one day, Brandon sat down at my restaurant office. It was a Tuesday afternoon slow time before dinner service. I was going over the books, checking inventory, the kind of mindless work that lets your brain wander. He knocked on the open door, and I looked up. His face had that expression teenagers get when they're about to ask for something they know might get them rejected. "You got a minute?" he asked. "Always," I said, and I meant it. He closed the door behind him. That alone told me this wasn't casual. He had a folder in his hands, actual paperwork, not just some half-baked idea. He'd been thinking about this. "I want to open a restaurant," he said, sliding the folder across my desk. "My own place. I've been saving. I've got about 30 grand put away, but I need another 50,000 to make it work the way I want." I opened the folder. He'd done his homework. Market analysis, location, scout menu concepts, financial projections. For a 32-year-old kid who'd bounced between jobs his whole life, this was impressive. But impressive didn't change the math. "Tell me about your experience," I said. "I've worked with you. I know food. I know how to manage people. I've been serious about this for years." "Working with me is different from owning," I told him. "You see the good days. You don't see the bad ones. You don't see the months where you're choosing between paying rent or restocking the bar." He shifted in his seat. I could feel him getting defensive already. "I know the risks," he said, "and I've got skin in the game. 30,000 is everything I've got." That hit different. I could see it in his eyes. He wasn't just dreaming. He was betting on himself. That took guts. But guts don't prevent you from losing everything. "That's exactly why I can't help," I said carefully. "You've got 30 grand. I've got experience. And that experience tells me the odds are terrible. He leaned forward. So you don't believe in me? That's not it. I do believe in you. But I've been where you want to go. I failed twice. I know what the odds look like. His jaw tightened. You're going to let me lose everything instead of helping me. I'm not helping you lose it faster, I said. There's a difference. He stood up. The conversation was over from his perspective. That's cold, he said. That's really cold. He left without another word. I wanted to call after him to make him understand that I was saying no, because I cared not, because I didn't believe in him. But sometimes words don't work the way you plan. Sometimes they just sit in the air like smoke. For the next week, Brandon barely came to the restaurant. He'd text Rachel, but not me. He'd show up for family dinner and be polite but distant. The kind of distance that young men use when they're building a case against you. Rachel noticed. Of course she noticed. She came into my office the following Wednesday evening after service had ended. He's devastated, she said without preamble. He's disappointed, I corrected. There's a difference. He came to you with real savings, a real plan, and you shut him down. I didn't shut him down. I said no, it's not the same thing. She sat down, her face tight with worry. He's your son, James, or he's supposed to be. Sons need their fathers to believe in them. Rachel. He already lost one father. He doesn't need to lose another one over money. That hit harder than she meant it to. I could see it in her face. She hadn't meant to weaponize his abandonment, but that's what she'd done. I do believe in him, I said quietly, and that's why I said no. She didn't understand. How could she? She was operating from the fear of loss. I was operating from the knowledge of what loss felt like. Different languages entirely. The cold silence stretched between us for a long time after that. Brandon didn't ask me for money again. He didn't ask me for much of anything. He was there, physically, dinners, holidays, moments where we still played house. But something had shifted. Something small had cracked. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself that eventually he'd be old enough to understand that sometimes the people who love you have to say no. I told myself a lot of things those 6 months. I didn't know that he'd already made different plans. Plans that didn't include asking me for permission anymore. Brandon didn't speak to me for days. Not angry words, not cold silence that demanded a reaction. Just absence. He'd text Rachel, but not me. He'd come to the restaurant on his day off, grab something to eat, and leave without stopping by my office. It was a kind of erasure. Then Greg showed up. I didn't know it at first. I heard it from Rachel, who heard it from Brandon, who'd finally said something to her after a week of radio silence. Greg had reached out of nowhere. After 10 years of not sending a birthday card or a phone call or anything that might suggest he remembered his son existed. Greg. The man had been a ghost in our lives for a decade. Brandon's biological father, a guy Rachel had dated in her 20s, a relationship that had ended badly. She'd raised Brandon alone without child support or emotional investment from his side. Brandon had grown up knowing his father's name the way you know the names of people you see in old photographs. Real enough, but not present. Now he was back. I found out because Brandon mentioned it at a family dinner, casual as hell, like it was nothing. My dad's been calling me, he said. We've been talking. Rachel's fork stopped halfway to her mouth. I kept eating, but I was listening to every word. That's good, Rachel said carefully. How is he? He's good. He wants to see me. Maybe help me with some business stuff. I put my fork down. What kind of business stuff? Brandon looked at me for the first time in days. He thinks I should open my own place. He says guys like us don't need to work for other people. There it was. The wedge. I could see it being driven between us like a nail. Guys like us, I said. Real men, Brandon said. The kind who don't hold other men back. Rachel's eyes moved between us. She knew what was happening. She just didn't know how to stop it. Over the next few weeks, I watched it unfold. Brandon started going out more, seeing Greg talking about him constantly. The way he talked about his father had this edge to it, admiration mixed with something else. Resentment, maybe, or hunger for approval he'd never got. Greg did what absent fathers do when they want to matter again. He played the hero. He told Brandon that I was trying to control him. He told him that real success came from people who didn't ask permission. He told him all the things a kid who'd been rejected needed to hear without any concern for whether those things were true. And Brandon believed it. I could see it happening, and I couldn't stop it. It was like watching someone you care about get pulled into a rip current. You're on the beach and you're yelling, but they can't hear you. The water's too loud. Then, about 4 weeks before Thanksgiving, Brandon came to me with a request that told me everything I needed to know. My dad's wondering if he could come to Thanksgiving dinner, Brandon said. At the restaurant. I know it's weird, but he wants to reconnect with the family. I didn't answer right away. I was trying to figure out how to explain to Brandon that this wasn't about reconciliation. This was about something else entirely. But how do you tell a son that his father is using him? How do you say that without sounding like you're the one doing the using? What do you want? I asked instead. And I want him there, Brandon said simply. And I want you to be cool about it. Rachel was quiet. I could feel her watching me, waiting to see what I'd say, waiting to see if I'd refuse and prove to Brandon that I was exactly what Greg had told him I was. So I said yes. I said yes to a man I'd never met, to a situation that felt wrong in ways I couldn't quite articulate. I said yes because I didn't want to lose my son. I said yes because I was afraid. Looking back now, I should have seen it. The way Brandon had suddenly stopped asking me for anything. The way he'd found someone new to believe in. The way that someone was deliberately pouring poison into his ear about me. I should have seen the whole thing coming. But I didn't. I just said yes to a dinner. And I told myself it was the right thing to do. I was wrong. 2 months before Thanksgiving, everything accelerated. I didn't see it happening. That's the thing about betrayal. It happens in the margins of your life, in conversations you're not part of, in moments when you're focused on something else entirely. By the time you realize what's going on, the foundation's already rotting underneath you. Rachel came to me later, much later, when everything had fallen apart, and told me what happened. She was crying, and her hands were shaking, and she kept apologizing like an apology could rewind time. Brandon had cornered her in the kitchen one afternoon. Just the two of them. He'd told her he needed her help. He said he had a plan to start his own business with his dad, not just a restaurant, something bigger. He said Greg believed in him. Greg was going to help him build something real. That sounds good, Rachel had said, trying to sound supportive despite her doubts. It is, Brandon said. But I need to make it happen fast, and I need you to help me. That's when he'd asked her to sign something, a loan application. He told her it was just paperwork, that his name would be on it, that he just needed a co-signer to make the banks happy. Standard stuff. Nothing serious. What he didn't tell her was whose name he wanted her to forge. Mine. He wanted Rachel to sign my name on legal documents. He wanted to make me responsible for $50,000 without my knowledge or consent. Rachel said she'd told him no at first. She said she'd explained that she couldn't do that it was illegal, that it would destroy the trust between me and her. But Brandon had gotten angry. He'd said that if she really loved him, she would help him. He'd said that if she didn't, he'd disappear. He'd go live with Greg. He'd never forgive her. He'd make sure she lost him. That was the threat that broke her, the fear of losing him all over again. So she'd done it. She'd gotten a pen, and she'd looked at a signature card or something, and she'd written my name in a way that looked close enough. Not perfect. She'd told me later that she'd tried to make it look sloppy, like maybe the bank wouldn't catch it, but close enough. And it had worked. Brandon had taken those papers to the bank, and somehow through his charm or their negligence, or just plain bad luck, they'd approved a $50,000 loan with my forged signature on it. $50,000 that Brandon had no intention of repaying. $50,000 that was now in his account, ready to be spent on a business plan that didn't exist. A plan that had only ever been about getting the money and running. When Rachel told me this, when she finally broke down and confessed what she'd done, I felt something inside me go still. Not angry, not yet, just still. Like the moment right before glass breaks when it's fractured, but hasn't fallen apart. "Why?" I asked her. "He said he'd leave," she whispered. "He said if I didn't help him, he'd go with Greg and I'd never see him again." "So you forged my signature." I was scared. I didn't want to lose him. I understood her fear. I really did. A mother who'd already lost one father to that child, she couldn't bear to lose the son too. But understanding didn't change what she'd done. Understanding didn't make it legal. Understanding didn't make it right. "When?" I asked. "2 months ago. Right after you said no to him. Right after I'd refused to help. Right after Brandon had decided to find another way. Right after Greg had whispered in his ear that he didn't need me, that real men took what they wanted." I sat down. The weight of it, the betrayal, the crime, the violation of my name crashed down like something physical. My wife had stolen my identity. My stepson had orchestrated it. They'd done it together, and they hadn't even told me. They just sat across from me at family dinners knowing what they'd done. Knowing that my name was being used without my permission. Knowing that my financial future had been compromised. And they'd said nothing. 2 weeks before Thanksgiving, Greg made his final call to Brandon. I didn't know about it at the time. I wouldn't know about it until much later when the police investigators would show me the phone records. But it happened. And it set everything in motion. Greg had orchestrated every detail. He'd been planning this since the moment he reappeared in Brandon's life. Every conversation with Brandon, every manipulation, every carefully placed word designed to make my stepson feel like he was building something instead of being used. It had all been leading to one specific night. Thanksgiving, at my restaurant, in front of my guests, in front of his mother. From what I learned later, Greg had told Brandon exactly what to do. He'd walked him through the script like a director coaching an actor. When everyone's sitting down, that's when you stand up. That's when you make your move. Tell him the table's yours now. Tell him he doesn't belong. Brandon had asked him questions. Questions like, what if he gets angry? And Greg had answered, then he looks like the problem, not you. It was calculated. Every word, every gesture designed not just to humiliate me, but to make me look bad in front of everyone. To plant the seed that I was the villain in this story. That I was the one who'd refused to help. That I was the one who didn't believe in my son. Greg knew exactly what he was doing. He understood that humiliation is more effective than violence. That public shame cuts deeper than a fist ever could. And Brandon, hungry for his father's approval after a decade of abandonment, had accepted the role he was being given. He'd practiced it. He'd rehearsed the moment in his head until it felt natural, until it felt righteous. Meanwhile, Rachel was spiraling. She knew what was coming. She knew because Brandon, in his excitement about the plan, had let some details slip to her. She'd tried to warn me without actually warning me, dropping hints like, maybe we should cancel Thanksgiving this year, or I have a bad feeling about this. But I was too focused on the restaurant, on making sure everything ran smoothly, to pick up on what she was really saying. I was too caught up in my own concerns to see the panic in her eyes. The week of Thanksgiving, I started feeling it. Not the specific knowledge of what was coming, but something underneath it all. A wrongness, a pressure building like a storm front you can feel in the air before the clouds show up. I'd walk into the kitchen and the energy would shift. Conversations would stop. People would look at me like they were waiting for something. Brandon would avoid eye contact. Rachel would find reasons to leave the room. It was like living in a house where everyone knew a secret except you. Where the furniture was arranged just slightly wrong in ways you couldn't quite articulate. Where something fundamental had shifted beneath the surface. 3 days before Thanksgiving, I tried to talk to Rachel about it. "What's going on?" I asked her directly. She looked at me, and I could see the war happening behind her eyes. She wanted to tell me. Part of her was desperate to tell me. But she was trapped. Trapped between her son and her husband. Trapped between her fear of what would happen if she warned me and her fear of what would happen if she didn't. "Nothing," she said finally. "I'm just stressed about the dinner." But it wasn't nothing, and we both knew it. I tried to shake it off. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that Brandon was just going through a phase, that this coldness would pass. That family drama always feels like the end of the world when you're in the middle of it, but looks manageable from the other side. I told myself a lot of things in those final days. I didn't know that in 72 hours, everything I believed about my family would be destroyed. I could feel something coming as Thanksgiving approached. Something dark, something I couldn't name or prevent. But I didn't know what it was. That was the thing about being blind to betrayal. You could feel the weight of it pressing down on you, but you couldn't see the source. You could sense the danger without understanding what you were in danger from. All I knew was that my house had become a stranger's house, and I was about to find out why. Thanksgiving morning. I made coffee the way Rachel liked it, strong and plain, no sugar. I wore the shirt I'd worn every Thanksgiving for the past 5 years. I put on my father's watch, the one he'd left me before he died. The one that still kept perfect time. These were rituals, small things that anchored me to who I was supposed to be on days like this. A man who honored tradition. A man who showed up. A man who knew his place in the world. I didn't know yet that my place was about to be taken from me. The restaurant was already humming by 9 in the morning. My staff moved through the kitchen like dancers, each person knowing their role, their timing, their part in the choreography. The turkey was already in the oven, the sides prepped and ready. Everything was going to be perfect. I'd made sure of it. Rachel moved through the space with her own kind of grace, helping where she could, smiling at people as they arrived. I watched her from across the room, and I could see the tension in her shoulders. The way her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. The way she kept glancing at the door, like she was waiting for something bad to walk through it. I told myself she was just nervous about hosting. Everyone gets nervous before a big dinner. By 11, the place was filling up. Victor came in with his wife. Paul brought a bottle of wine. Lawrence and Douglas, old friends from my VFW days, took their seats by the window. People I'd known for decades. People who'd watched me build this place from nothing. People I trusted. The air felt different when they were in the room. Heavier. Like the weight of expectation. They were here to see me host. To see me do what I did best, make people feel welcome, make them feel like they mattered. I remember thinking in those moments before everything collapsed that this was what I'd been working toward my whole life. This moment, this table, these people, this proof that I'd built something real. Then Brandon walked in with Greg. Greg was tall, broader than Brandon, with the kind of confidence that comes from not giving a damn what anyone thinks. He shook hands, made small talk, acted like he belonged there, like he'd been invited. Rachel's face went pale when she saw him. Not surprised, she'd known he was coming. But something about seeing him in person, about the reality of it, seemed to hit her differently. Brandon moved to the kitchen to help with the last-minute preparations. I nodded at him. He didn't nod back. Just walked past like I wasn't there. By noon, everyone was seated. The table was full. The turkey was carved. The sides were arranged just right. The candles were lit. This was the moment I lived for, the moment when everything came together. When a room full of people felt like family. I sat down in my chair. The wooden table, my father's table, felt solid beneath my hands. Familiar. Right. I looked around at the faces. Victor was telling a story about something that happened years ago. Paul was laughing. The old friends were there. Rachel was smiling finally, like maybe she'd been wrong about her premonition. Like maybe this day was going to be okay after all. Brandon was sitting across the table from me, quiet, waiting. Then he stood up. His eyes were bright and mean. The kind of bright that comes from adrenaline. The kind of mean that's been rehearsed and refined until it feels natural. Everyone went quiet, like they could sense the shift in the air, like they knew something was about to happen. On this table belongs to my father now, Jim. You need to leave. Brandon's voice cut through the room like a blade. Everyone stopped. Forks froze mid-air. Conversations died. I looked up from my plate thinking I'd misheard him. But his face was stone-cold, certain. His eyes locked on mine, and there was something in them I'd never seen before. Not anger, not frustration, pure contempt. Brandon, what are you? I started, but he was already moving. He grabbed the edge of the wooden table, my father's table, and shoved it hard toward me. The force was deliberate, calculated. I stumbled backward, my body catching the chair behind me, and then gravity took over. I fell. The sound of it is what I remember most. Not the impact, not the pain in my hip and shoulder, but the sound, the scrape of the chair, the clatter of silverware hitting the hardwood floor, the shattering crash of wine glasses. And the gravy boat. It went airborne, pouring hot brown liquid across the white tablecloth, across my shirt, down the front of my chest. Everything went quiet. No one moved. Victor and Paul just stared. Lawrence's jaw hung open. Douglas's hand was still on his fork. Rachel stood frozen at the edge of the dining room, a serving spoon in her hand. Greg sat back in his chair with a thin smile, like he was watching a scene play out exactly as rehearsed. But it was the table that got my attention. My father's table, the one he'd built with his own hands, the one I'd spent 6 months restoring after he died, the one that meant everything was now smeared with gravy and mashed potatoes. And worse, much worse, my father's watch. The one he'd left me, the one I was wearing. It had fallen from my wrist when I went down. I lunged for it, not thinking, just reacting, but my hand was shaking so badly I could barely grip it. The crystal face was cracked. Not shattered, thank God, but cracked. A thin line running diagonally across the dial like a scar. Rachel, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Rachel, help me up. She didn't move. She just looked at the mess on the table, at the gravy pooling near the centerpiece, and then she walked to the kitchen and came back with a rag. She started wiping down the table, not helping me up, not asking if I was hurt, just cleaning. That's when I felt it. That moment when everything shifts. When you realize the ground beneath you isn't solid anymore. When you understand in a way that has nothing to do with logic and everything to do with survival instinct, that you don't belong here. I'm going to get some air, I said to no one in particular. I pushed myself up from the floor, my legs unsteady, gravy dripping from my clothes. No one said anything. No one followed me. The room was silent except for the soft scrape of Rachel's rag against the wooden table. I walked out into the cold. The parking lot was empty except for my truck. The sky had turned gray, that flat, featureless gray of late autumn in Iowa. A few snowflakes were just starting to fall, melting as soon as they touched the ground. The wind cut right through my gravy-stained shirt. I sat in the cab of my truck for a long time, just sat there staring out at nothing. My hands were still shaking. My father's watch felt heavy on my wrist. I wanted to look at it to check if it was still keeping time, but I couldn't make myself do it. Part of me was afraid that the watch, like everything else tonight, was broken beyond repair. The snow kept falling, and I sat there alone in my truck in the parking lot of my own restaurant, wondering how I got here. Wondering what I'd done wrong. Wondering if Rachel had ever actually loved me, or if I'd just been a convenient solution to a problem I didn't fully understand. But mostly I was thinking about my father, about the lessons he'd tried to teach me, about respect, the kind you earn and the kind you're supposed to give, about honor, about knowing your own worth. And I was thinking about the fact that I'd failed at all of it. I didn't sleep that night. Not a second. Not even a moment where my mind went quiet and my body finally gave in. I just laid there in the dark, staring at the ceiling of the bedroom Rachel and I shared, listening to her breathe next to me like nothing had happened, like the world hadn't just shifted on its axis. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Brandon's face, the coldness in it, the certainty. I heard the sound of the table scraping across the floor. I felt the impact of my body hitting the ground, the warmth of the gravy soaking through my shirt. And I kept thinking about my father's watch, that crack in the crystal face. Around 3 a.m., I gave up trying. I went downstairs to the kitchen, made a pot of coffee strong enough to strip paint, and sat at the counter watching the darkness outside start to thin into gray. The snow had stopped. The world looked clean, pristine, like nothing bad had ever happened. It was a lie. At 6:13 a.m., my phone buzzed on the counter next to me. A notification from First National Bank. Credit alert. An unauthorized loan application had been submitted under my name. $50,000. Approved. For a second, I thought it was spam, some kind of identity theft scam, the kind they warn you about on the news. But the bank name was right. The account number matched my business account, and the date was recent, just yesterday. My hands were shaking when I called the bank. The line rang 3 times before someone picked up. First National Bank, this is Diane speaking. How can I help you? I recognized her voice, Diane Foster. She'd been working the business accounts desk for 5 years. Professional, careful, the kind of person who didn't make mistakes. Diane, it's James Morrison. I just got an alert about a loan that was supposedly approved in my name yesterday. I need to know what the hell is going on. There was a pause. A long one. The kind of pause that told me something was very wrong. Mr. Morrison, I'm going to need to put you through to our fraud investigation unit. But first I need to ask you something. Did you authorize a $50,000 business loan yesterday? No, I said. I absolutely did not. And did you authorize anyone else to sign on your behalf? No. Another pause. Mr. Morrison, I'm seeing the loan paperwork here and there's a signature on the application. It says James Morrison. But there's something else. The signature on the guarantor line says Tommy Morrison. Does that name mean anything to you? The coffee cup fell from my hand. I didn't even realize I was holding it until it shattered on the kitchen tile. Tommy. No one called me Tommy anymore. Not in 15 years. Not since my father died. My father was the only person who'd ever called me that. When I was a kid, when things were simple, when he was still alive, and the world made sense, he'd say, Tommy, come here and help your old man. Or Tommy, that's not how you do it, watch me. Tommy was his name for me. His alone. Mr. Morrison. Diane's voice was careful now. Are you still there? Yeah, I said. Yeah, I'm here. Can you describe the signature for me? I heard the rustle of papers on her end. It's printed, actually, not handwritten, and the name is in block letters. Tommymorrison. I couldn't breathe. How did they know? How did Brandon and Rachel know that name, that nickname I'd never told them? I was sure of it. It was something I kept close, something that belonged to my father and me and to no one else. Unless one of them had gone through my things, through old letters, old photographs, something from before they came into my life, something that showed who I used to be. Mr. Morrison, I'm transferring you to our fraud department right now. They're going to need a full statement from you. Wait, I said. Before you do, who submitted the application? I mean, who came into the bank? It was submitted online, Mr. Morrison. No one came in. It was all done through our website. Online. They'd filled it out from home. Probably sitting at the same dining room table where we'd eaten Thanksgiving dinner just hours before. Probably with my computer. Probably while Rachel watched over their shoulder. My wife. My stepson. My name. My father's memory. All of it stolen. After I hung up with Diane, I sat at the kitchen counter for a long time. Just sat there holding the phone in my hand, staring at nothing. A forged signature, $50,000, and a name only one person had ever called me, Tommy, my father's name for me. The police were the logical next step. I knew that. A lawyer was the smart move, but I also knew something else I needed more than just a phone call and a story. I needed proof. Real, undeniable proof that this wasn't some mistake or miscommunication, that this was intentional, calculated, and I knew exactly where to find it. The restaurant had security cameras, state-of-the-art ones I'd installed 3 years ago. They covered every inch of the dining room, every table, every corner. And they recorded everything, including audio, especially audio from the tables picked up by the directional mics I'd had installed. If Brandon had taken that phone call from Greg during Thanksgiving dinner, and I was almost certain he had, then the cameras would have captured it. The words, the plan, the manipulation. I needed to hear it myself before I told anyone else, so I didn't call the police. Not yet. I grabbed my keys and drove straight to the restaurant. The parking lot was empty except for my truck and the cleaning crew's van. We were closed Friday mornings, so the place was quiet, that wrong kind of quiet that follows after chaos. I let myself in through the kitchen door. Tommy, one of my line cooks, looked up from scrubbing down the stove. "Boss, you okay? You look like—" "I'm fine," I said. "So just need to check something in the office." I didn't wait for him to respond. I walked down the hallway to the small back office, locked the door behind me, and sat down at my desk. My hands were shaking as I pulled up the security system. The CCTV files from Thursday, Thanksgiving Day. I scrolled to 1 p.m. the time Brandon stood up, and I pressed play. What I saw wasn't a surprise. I'd lived through it. But what I heard was something else entirely. The camera angles were tight on Brandon and Greg, and there, clear as day, was Brandon's phone sitting on the table next to his plate, on speaker. And on the other end of that phone was Greg's voice coming through like he was sitting right there at the table with us. "Now, Brandon, do it now. Tell him that table is mine now. Tell him he doesn't belong here. This is the moment. Make it count." My hand went cold. This wasn't a moment of passion. This wasn't some kid who'd had too much to drink and said something stupid. This was orchestrated, choreographed. Greg had been on the phone the entire time, feeding Brandon his lines like an actor with a script. I rewound it, played it again, and again. Every word, every instruction, every manipulation. Once he's out of the way, we're going to own this place. Once he realizes he doesn't belong, everything shifts, Brandon. Everything becomes ours. I sat back in my chair and stared at the frozen image of Brandon's face on the screen. Who was Greg? What was his story? Why would he go to such elaborate lengths to destroy a man he barely knew? I spent the next 2 hours digging. I called a private investigator I'd used for background checks before. I went through old business emails. And I looked for something specific, something I remembered, something I'd almost forgotten. 7 years ago, a loan request. I found it in my inbox, buried under years of business correspondence. An email from an account I didn't recognize at first. But the signature was clear: Gregory Nash. James, I'm reaching out because I want to turn my life around. I've got a solid plan for a bar and grill restaurant. I need $30,000 to get started. I know we don't have history, but Rachel vouches for me. I'd really appreciate if you'd consider this. It's a fresh start for me and for Brandon. Greg. I stared at that email for a long time. Then I noticed something else. The email had been opened. Recently. Within the last month, according to the metadata. Not by me. I opened my email settings and checked the access log. Rachel had logged into my business email account on 3 separate occasions in the past 6 weeks. Once in November, once in October, and once in September. My wife had gone through my emails. I pulled up the email thread. There were responses from Greg that I'd never seen before. Messages that had been read and then deleted from my view. Messages that painted a picture I'd forgotten, or maybe one I'd chosen not to see. Rachel told me, "You're thinking about it. That's great, James. Brandon really needs his father in his life. I promise you won't regret this." And then weeks later, another message: "I understand you said no. That's disappointing. But I respect your decision. Tell Rachel I appreciate her trying to help." Rachel. Always Rachel in between me and Greg. Always advocating for him. Always defending him. And then 7 years of nothing. 7 years of Greg gone. 7 years of Rachel and me building something together, me thinking we were solid, that she'd moved past it. But she hadn't forgotten. I kept digging. Greg had owned a construction company, briefly. It went under in 2008 during the recession. After that, he'd bounced from job to job. Bartending, retail. At one point, he worked as a handyman. He'd borrowed money from people he knew and never paid them back. He had liens on his property. He'd been sued twice for non-payment of debts. He was a man drowning in his own failures. And the only person who'd ever offered him a life raft was Rachel. Until I said no. I understood now. Greg had disappeared because he had nowhere else to go. No one else to turn to. And he'd been bitter about it for 7 years. Bitter at me for refusing him. Bitter at Rachel for not being able to convince me. Bitter at the life he didn't have. But then Brandon started asking about his father, and Rachel answered. And suddenly Greg had a way back in. Not to reconcile with his son. Not to rebuild his life. He came back to settle a debt he'd been collecting interest on for 7 years. I clicked back to the audio file one more time, and I heard Greg's voice, cold and certain. "Once he's out of the way, we'll have everything. Every single thing will be ours, Brandon. Trust me on this." And I realized, sitting alone in my office with the frozen image of my stepson's face on the screen, and the knowledge that my wife had been deceiving me for weeks, that the worst part wasn't the betrayal. The worst part was understanding exactly how much Greg hated me, and knowing that Rachel had helped him nurse that hatred in secret. I made a decision that Friday morning. I wasn't going to look away. I wasn't going to cover for anyone. I wasn't going to protect Rachel or Brandon or Greg by staying silent. The police needed to know. The law needed to know. What they did with that information was out of my hands now. I called Ed Mitchell at 9 in the morning. His office was in a converted brownstone downtown, all dark wood and professional distance. He'd been my accountant's recommendation 5 years ago when I had to deal with some business disputes. He was the kind of lawyer who didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Tell me what happened," he said, closing his office door behind me. So I did. All of it. The Thanksgiving incident, the loan fraud, the forged signature, the CCTV footage, Rachel's access to my email, Greg's 7-year disappearance and sudden return. I laid it out like evidence piece by piece, letting the facts speak for themselves. Ed listened without interrupting. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and nodded slowly. "You have a strong case," he said. "Very strong. But we need to move carefully. The forgery is clear. The audio evidence from the CCTV is gold. It shows premeditation and coordination. But we start with the police report. That's the foundation for everything else." "How long will this take?" I asked. "The investigation, a few weeks, maybe more. The trial, if it comes to that, anywhere from months to years. These things don't move fast, Mr. Morrison. But they do move. And when they do, the results tend to be thorough." I nodded. I'd expected that. I wasn't looking for quick. I was looking for justice. We spent the next hour organizing the evidence: CCTV files, the audio recording, the loan application with the forged signature, bank statements, email records showing Rachel's access to my account. Every piece of documentation that proved this wasn't a mistake, it was a plan. Ed made copies of everything. He had his paralegal create a timeline. He took notes on what would need to be verified and what would stand on its own. "I want you to file a police report today," Ed said. "And I'm going to have a forensics expert examine that signature. We'll also need to subpoena Rachel's and Brandon's electronic records, phone logs, email accounts, everything." "What about Greg?" I asked. "Greg is the mastermind. That's clear from the audio. But legally, he's harder to touch because he didn't forge the signature himself. He orchestrated it. That's conspiracy fraud, possible wire fraud, if they used electronic communication to set this up. The prosecutor will decide how to charge him, but he'll go down too." That afternoon, Chuck Griffin, the state investigator assigned to the case, came to my office. He was a lean man in his 50s, with gray at the temples and the methodical patience of someone who'd spent decades looking for the truth in plain sight. Chuck pulled out a signature pad and asked me to write my full name 10 times. Not in my normal handwriting, he wanted me to vary it slightly the way people do. Slow signatures, fast signatures, different pen pressure. Then he compared those signatures to the one on the loan application. "This is textbook forgery," he said, pulling out a magnifying glass. "See here, the pressure is all wrong, and the letter forms are inconsistent with your natural variations. Whoever forged this had a sample to work from, but they didn't capture the unconscious habits you have when you actually sign your name. This is someone copying, not someone being. It'll stand up in court." He spent 3 hours with me, going through the CCTV footage, listening to the audio of Greg's voice coaching Brandon, taking notes on timestamps and details. He photographed every piece of documentation. He was thorough in a way that was almost meditative slow, careful not missing a single detail. When he finished, he looked at me with something like sympathy in his eyes. "I've been doing this a long time, Mr. Morrison," he said. "And I can tell you that what happened to you, the violation of it, the betrayal, that's not uncommon. But the evidence you have is. Most cases like this, the family covers it up. They make excuses. They try to work it out at the dinner table instead of in court." "I'm not most people," I said. "No," he agreed. "You're not." The police report was filed that evening. 23 pages of documentation, timeline, and evidence. Ed called me at home to confirm. "We're in motion now," he said. "The prosecutor will review everything. If they see what I see, charges will be filed within 2 weeks. Brandon and Rachel for fraud, forgery, and identity theft. Greg for conspiracy and wire fraud. From there, it goes through the system. And then, I asked, and then we wait. We prepare. We let the law do what it's supposed to do. But Mr. Morrison, I want you to know something. Your honor will be restored. Not by me, not by the courtroom, by the truth. And that's already in motion. I hung up the phone and looked out the window of my living room. It was dark outside. The first real snow of winter was falling, covering everything in white. For the first time since Thanksgiving, I felt like I could breathe. My phone started ringing 2 days after I filed the police report. It didn't stop. The first call was Brandon. His voice was hard, accusatory, like I was the one who'd done something wrong. "You're going to destroy this family," he said. "How could you do this? How could you turn us into the police like criminals?" "You are criminals," I said quietly. "You forged my signature. You stole $50,000 in my name." "I didn't have a choice," he said. Greg, he said. "I don't want to hear it, Brandon. Don't call me again." I hung up. He called back 3 times that night. The next morning, it was Rachel. She was crying. Not angry. Not defensive. Just broken. The sound of her voice made something in my chest tighten, and I hated myself for feeling it. "James, please," she said. "Please don't do this." Brandon didn't understand what he was doing. He's just a kid trying to impress his father. And I was trying to keep our family together. That's all I was doing. "You accessed my email, Rachel, multiple times. You knew about this." "I was trying to help Greg," she said. "I thought if I could understand what he needed, I could convince you to help. I was trying to be the bridge between you two." "You lied to me," I said. "You violated my privacy. You didn't try to be a bridge, you helped plan this." "That's not fair," she said, and I could hear the tears in her voice. "I never wanted any of this. I just wanted you to understand him, to give him a chance. You had your chance to stop this, Rachel, and you didn't." I hung up. She called back 4 times, then 7 more times after that. By the end of the first week, I stopped counting. On the 8th day, Greg called. His voice was different, not desperate like Brandon, not pleading like Rachel, just cold, angry. "You think you've won," he said. "You think filing a report is going to make you feel better about yourself. You're a coward, James. You could have helped me years ago. You could have given me one chance, but you didn't. So now I'm taking what should have been mine all along." "You're going to prison," I said. "Maybe, but you're going to live the rest of your life knowing that you destroyed your own family. You had one chance to do the right thing, and you chose your pride instead." The line went dead. He called back that same day, and the next day, and the day after that. By the end of the second week, I'd received 43 calls. 12 from Brandon, 14 from Rachel, 9 from Greg. The rest were from unknown numbers, probably other people who'd been convinced to try reaching me on their behalf. Relatives I barely knew. Old friends of Rachel's. People I'd never met. Each call was a variation on the same theme. "Please forgive them. Please drop the charges. Please save the family. Please, please, please." And each time I said no. It wasn't easy. Rachel's voice especially cut through me every single time. But I kept coming back to something Ed had said during our second meeting. "The system isn't about feelings, Mr. Morrison. It's about consequences. And right now, if you back down, there are no consequences. Just another family kept in the dark about what one of their members did. Just another betrayal normalized. Just another victim expected to smile and move on. So I didn't smile, and I didn't move on, and I didn't answer the phone anymore. Instead, I waited. 3 weeks after filing the police report, a formal letter arrived at the house. It was from the courthouse. The state of Iowa versus Brandon Cole, Rachel Foster, and Gregory Nash. The hearing was scheduled for January 9th. That evening, Ed called me. The prosecutor reviewed everything, he said. She's moving forward with charges on all counts. Forgery, fraud, identity theft, wire fraud for Greg. They're taking this seriously, Mr. Morrison. What do I need to do? I asked. Be ready to testify, bring your documentation, and prepare yourself. This is going to be difficult. Your wife and stepson are going to be in that courtroom. Greg is going to be there, and they're all going to try to convince a judge that what they did wasn't what you know it was. I'm ready, I said. The hearing is January 9th, Ed said. Are you ready for that? Because once we step into that courtroom, there's no going back. I looked out the window at the snow falling on my empty house. No Brandon, no Rachel. Just me in the silence. I'm ready, I said again. And for the first time in 3 weeks, I felt the weight lift slightly. Not all of it. Not yet, but enough to know that I'd made the right choice. The truth was coming. And on January 9th, it would finally be heard. The courthouse in Des Moines was a place designed to make you feel small. Marble walls stretched up 3 stories, cold and gray. Steel benches were bolted to the floor, like they expected people to try and escape. The radiators clanked and hissed, but the air never seemed to warm up. It was January, and the whole building smelled like old paper and decisions that couldn't be unmade. I'd arrived at 8:15 a.m. The hallway on the 3rd floor was nearly empty. That's when I saw them. Brandon was sitting on a bench by the window, hunched over like he was trying to fold himself into nothing. He'd lost weight. His suit, probably borrowed, hung off his frame. He didn't look up when I passed. Greg stood near the water fountain, adjusting the collar of a suit that didn't fit him right. The sleeves were too short. The jacket pulled across his shoulders. But it was his eyes that struck me, that same cold, calculating stare I'd heard in the audio. He saw me, held my gaze for a moment, then looked away with a thin smile. Rachel was pacing near the courtroom door, her arms wrapped around herself. She looked hollow. Her face was drawn, and there were dark circles under her eyes that no amount of makeup could hide. When she saw me, she stopped walking. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something, but then Ed Mitchell appeared at my side and she turned away. You ready? Ed asked quietly. I nodded. I'd been ready since the night I heard Greg's voice on that CCTV audio. At 9:00 a.m. sharp, the bailiff called the case. State of Iowa versus Brandon Cole, Rachel Foster, and Gregory Nash. Charges include forgery, fraud, identity theft, and wire fraud. Judge Helen Whitmore entered the courtroom and everyone stood. She was a tall woman with gray hair pulled back severely. She didn't look at anyone in particular, just scanned the room like she was taking inventory. Then she sat, and we all sat down. The prosecutor, Victoria Sullivan, was a woman in her mid-50s with sharp features and sharper eyes. She'd been professional in every interaction I'd had with her, but there was steel underneath. No wasted words, no theatrics, just facts and consequences. The complainant will take the stand, the bailiff said. I stood. My hands were steady. My voice was steady. That surprised me a little. The oath was routine. I swore to tell the truth. Then I sat in the witness box and Victoria Sullivan approached. Morrison, she began. Did you authorize a $50,000 business loan in your name approximately 6 months ago? No, I said. I did not. And the signature on that loan application was that your signature, no. She showed me the forged document. I looked at it for a long moment. The signature looked close to mine, but it wasn't. The pressure was wrong. The flow was wrong. Someone had studied my name, but they hadn't lived with it the way I had. "That's not my signature," I said. Victoria nodded and handed the document to the judge. Then Ed stood up. I'd prepared for this, but there was still a moment where I didn't know what he was going to ask. "Mr. Morrison," Ed said, "6 months before this fraudulent loan application, did Brandon Cole ask you for a $50,000 loan?" "Yes." "And did you refuse?" "I did." "Why?" I took a breath. The courtroom was completely silent. I could hear the radiator ticking the scratch of the court reporter's pen. "Because he wasn't ready," I said. Ed waited. He knew I had more to say. "Your Honor." I continued looking at Judge Whitmore. "I need to tell you about my father first." The judge nodded slightly. I told them about Henry Morrison, about how he came to this state with nothing, how he worked 14-hour days to build a restaurant from the ground up, how he built it not just with his hands, but with his character. Every customer who walked through that door knew they were walking into a place built on integrity. Henry didn't cut corners, he didn't take shortcuts, and he didn't hand things out, not even to his own son. When I was old enough to work, I said, "My father didn't give me a manager's position. He didn't put me in charge. He made me start at the bottom. He made me understand that success isn't about being handed an opportunity. It's about proving you can handle what comes next." I paused. Tim Brandon asked me for $50,000. I continued. "That's not a small amount. That's a commitment. It's a responsibility." And when I looked at him, I didn't see someone who understood that yet. I didn't see someone who was ready to carry that weight. So I said no. Victoria Sullivan rose. "And was that decision related to your father's legacy?" "Yes," I said. "My father built a table. Not just any table, a dining table for the restaurant. He carved it himself. He spent weeks on it. That table has fed hundreds of people. It served as the head table of the restaurant for 40 years. Do you know what that table represents?" The judge leaned forward slightly. "Like character," I said. "Not money, not ownership, character. My father used to tell me, 'Tommy, your name is your promise. Protect it.' He meant that the only thing that matters in the end is what you've built. Not with your hands, but with your reputation, your integrity, your word. That table is a symbol of that, and when I refused Brandon's loan, I was protecting that legacy." Victoria nodded and sat down. "Mr. Morrison," Judge Whitmore said, "you mentioned you didn't come here to destroy your family." "No, Your Honor," I said. "I came here because the truth matters more than pretending everything is fine. I came here because my father taught me that. I didn't authorize that loan. Someone forged my signature. Someone manipulated Brandon into doing it. And someone," I looked directly at Greg, "orchestrated the whole thing." The courtroom was silent again. "I didn't come here to hurt anyone," I said quietly. "I came here to tell the truth." When I stepped down from the witness stand, I didn't look at Brandon. I didn't look at Rachel. I didn't look at Greg. I walked back to my seat and sat beside Ed. "That was good," he whispered. I didn't say anything. I was thinking about my father, about Tommy, about the table, about the 40-year-old promise that still stood. The court was about to hear the audio. If you're still here, leave a comment. Do you agree with me? Was refusing the loan the right decision, or was it too harsh for a family in pain? Know this, the next part will reveal every secret. Some details are fictional to make the story clearer, but the core of this story about honor your name and your promise is completely true. If you want to stop here, that's fine. But if you want to continue, prepare yourself for what comes next. After I finished testifying, I stepped down from the stand. Ed gave me a slight nod, the kind that said, "This is where it gets real." "Your Honor," he said, approaching the judge's bench, "I'd like to present an audio recording for the court. This recording comes from the CCTV system at Mr. Morrison's restaurant captured during the Thanksgiving dinner incident. It contains a telephone conversation between the defendant, Gregory Nash, and the defendant, Brandon Cole." Judge Whitmore nodded. "Proceed." The courtroom went silent. Ed pressed play on a speaker system, and Greg's voice filled the room. Not through a phone, not muffled or distant. His actual voice recorded live in the moment, sharp and clear and unmistakable. "Now, Brandon. Do it now. Tell him that table is mine. Tell him he doesn't belong here." Then Brandon's voice, uncertain, young, like someone reciting lines he'd been given. I don't think I can." "Yes, you can." Greg's voice cut through. "Just tell him. The table is yours now. The restaurant should be yours." That was all Ed needed to play. The instruction, the manipulation, just enough to show the pattern. The audio cut out. Brandon had gone white. He was staring at the speaker like it had physically struck him. I could see his hands shaking on the table in front of him. "There's more," Ed said quietly. He pressed play again. This time it was a different conversation. Brandon's voice, but different now. Hopeful, almost excited. "Dad, when can I start managing the restaurant? Like, what's my role going to be? Do I get to—" Greg's voice cut in. Harsh, cold. "You're my son, not a business partner. Don't confuse the two. Once we have it, I decide what you get. You want to work there? Fine. You want a piece of it. That's not how this works. You do what I tell you to do, and maybe I give you something. But you don't negotiate with me. You're not in a position to negotiate. But you said—" "I said what I needed to say to get you on board. You wanted a father in your life, Brandon. I'm here now, and this is how it works with me. You do what I say. Full stop." The audio cut out. Brandon had his head in his hands now. His shoulders were shaking. Across the table, Greg's face had gone dark. His jaw was clenched so tight, I thought his teeth might crack. He wasn't looking at Brandon. He wasn't looking at anyone. Just straight ahead, his eyes dead. Rachel's hand had gone to her mouth. Tears were running down her face. The prosecutor, Victoria Sullivan, stood silently. She didn't need to say anything. The audio had said everything. "Your Honor," Ed said, "this recording demonstrates premeditation, manipulation, and conspiracy. It shows that Gregory Nash deliberately coached his son to commit an act of fraud and assault. It shows that Mr. Nash was not attempting to help his son find his way or build a future. He was using him as a tool to commit fraud and take control of Mr. Morrison's business." Judge Whitmore was making notes. Her face was unreadable, but her hand moved with certainty across the paper. Ed walked back to where I was standing. "The defense rests," he said quietly. And then I watched something break inside Brandon Cole. He looked at Greg, really looked at him for the first time since the audio started playing. And in that moment, I saw the truth dawn on his face. The realization that the man he'd been trying to impress, the father he'd been trying to connect with, had never seen him as anything more than a pawn. His mouth opened like he was going to say something, but nothing came out. Greg wouldn't meet his eyes, and Brandon sitting at the defendant's table next to his father. And Rachel finally understood the full depth of what had been done to him. The courtroom was so quiet. You could hear the court reporter's fingers on the keyboard. The courtroom felt different after my testimony. The air was heavier. People shifted in their seats like they were uncomfortable with the weight of what had been said. Judge Whitmore made a note on her pad, and Victoria Sullivan returned to her seat with a small, satisfied nod. Ed leaned over and whispered, "That was exactly what we needed." I didn't respond. I was watching Rachel. She was staring at her hands like they belonged to someone else. Victoria Sullivan stood. The people call Rachel Foster to the stand. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Rachel stood slowly like her legs barely remembered how to work. Her face was already wet with tears before she even reached the witness stand. She moved like someone walking through water, each step deliberate, each movement exhausted. When the bailiff administered the oath, Rachel's voice was so quiet that the court reporter had to ask her to speak up. She nodded, and then she sat in the witness box and folded her hands in her lap so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Victoria approached her with the kind of careful patience I'd come to recognize as her trademark. No aggression, no theatrics, just facts extracted one painful admission at a time. "Ms. Foster," Victoria began, "did you sign James Morrison's name on a loan application?" Rachel nodded. Then, remembering the court's requirement, she whispered, "Yes." "Speak louder, please." "No, yes," Rachel said again, her voice a little stronger but still fragile. "I signed his name." "Did Mr. Morrison authorize you to sign his name?" "No." "Why did you do it?" Rachel's shoulders started to shake. She put her hand over her face, and when she lowered it, her eyes were swimming with tears. When she spoke, her voice cracked on every word. "Because Brandon said he would leave me," she said. "He said if I didn't sign, if I didn't help them, he would go with Greg. He would disappear. And I couldn't lose him. I couldn't." The courtroom went completely silent. Even the radiators seemed to stop their infernal ticking. "He's my son," Rachel continued, her voice raw and breaking. "My only son. When Brandon was young, his father barely saw him. And then Greg came back into his life, and Brandon was so hungry for that connection, so desperate for a father who would pay attention to him. And I was so afraid that if I didn't help, if I refused, that Greg would convince Brandon to leave me, to choose his father over me. And I couldn't bear that." She took a shaking breath. "When Brandon said he needed me to sign James's name, that it was the only way to keep the family together, that his father just needed the guarantee that no one would get hurt." She broke off, unable to continue for a moment. "I just thought about losing Brandon, about him choosing Greg over me, over us, and I was so afraid of being alone." Victoria waited, letting the silence fill the courtroom, like water filling a container. When she finally spoke again, her voice was gentle. "Did Gregory Nash ask you directly to sign Mr. Morrison's name?" "No," Rachel said. "He didn't ask me directly, but Brandon did. Brandon said his father wanted to start a business and that he needed James's name as a guarantee. He said it was just a formality, that nothing would actually happen." "And what did Brandon say would happen if you refused?" Rachel's face crumpled. "He said he'd leave with Greg. He said I was making him choose between his father and his stepfather, and that if I didn't help, he'd choose his biological father. He said he'd never forgive me. He said..." She paused, swallowing hard. "He said he didn't want to live with me anymore if I wasn't going to support his father." The words hung in the air like an accusation, but Rachel wasn't accusing Brandon. She was confessing to her own weakness. "So you signed Mr. Morrison's name to keep your son from leaving," Victoria said. "Yes," Rachel whispered. "I was trying to keep my family together. I was trying to protect Brandon, I thought if I signed, everything would be okay. That Greg would get his loan, Brandon would be happy, and we'd move forward. I didn't understand that I was helping orchestrate fraud. I didn't think about James. I only thought about my son. Victoria looked at the judge, then at Ed. "Your witness," she said. Ed stood and approached Rachel slowly. He wasn't aggressive. He was methodical, like someone carefully examining the pieces of a broken thing. "Ms. Foster," he began. "When Brandon said he would leave if you didn't sign, did you believe him?" Rachel nodded immediately. "Yes. He was already pulling away from me. Greg was in his ear constantly telling him that James had rejected him, that the family didn't want to help him, that Greg was the only one who really believed in him. Brandon was already halfway out the door. And you were afraid of losing him completely." "More than anything," Rachel said. Her voice was steady now despite the tears. "I was terrified. Brandon is my only child. After the divorce, after so many years of it being just the two of us. And then suddenly Greg comes back and starts filling his head with ideas about what he could do, about how his father could help him. I was losing him. I could feel it happening. And when he asked me to sign, it felt like a test. Like if I refused, I'd lose him completely." Ed nodded slowly. "Did you read the loan application before you signed?" "No," Rachel said. "I didn't. Brandon brought it to me and asked me to sign James's name. He said they needed it right away, that Greg was waiting, that if we delayed, Greg would think we weren't serious. I signed it. I didn't read it. I didn't think about it. I just wanted to keep my son." "Were you aware at that time that Gregory Nash was manipulating Brandon?" Rachel hesitated. I suspected something, but I didn't want to know. If I had stopped to think about it, if I had really considered what Greg was doing, I would have had to refuse. And I couldn't refuse. Not if it meant losing Brandon." The silence that followed was profound. Judge Whitmore made a note on her pad, her face unreadable. Victoria Sullivan stood again. "Miss Foster, did you ever speak to Gregory Nash about this plan?" "No, never directly. He would call Brandon, and Brandon would come to me and tell me what Greg wanted. I never spoke to Greg myself about it." "So everything you know about Gregory Nash's intentions comes from Brandon?" "Yes," Rachel said. "Everything." Victoria nodded. She looked at the judge. "I have no further questions." Judge Whitmore looked at Rachel for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight of understanding that seemed to surprise everyone in the courtroom. "Ms. Foster," she said, "this court recognizes that you acted out of fear for your son. The threat that he would leave you if you didn't participate in this fraud constitutes coercion. However, you did sign Mr. Morrison's name on a legal document without authorization. That is forgery regardless of your motivation." Rachel nodded, her shoulders sagging. "I am prepared to recommend significant leniency at sentencing," Judge Whitmore continued, "given the evidence of coercion. But this court cannot ignore the fact that a crime occurred." "I understand, Your Honor," Rachel said quietly. Judge Whitmore set down her pen and folded her hands. The courtroom was absolutely silent. "I have reviewed all the evidence presented today," she said formally. "The CCTV recordings, the audio evidence provided by the prosecution, the forged documents, the testimony of all parties involved, the background investigation conducted by law enforcement." My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. This was it. This was the moment when the law would decide what happened next. This was the moment when truth would either prevail or be buried under excuses and family ties. "Young Gregory Nash," Judge Whitmore continued, her voice steady and authoritative, is found guilty of conspiracy to commit fraud, wire fraud, and identity theft. The evidence demonstrates that your actions were premeditated and calculated. You manipulated your own son into committing crimes on your behalf. You forged another man's signature. You attempted to steal his property and his business through deception. This court finds your behavior reprehensible and taking the most serious view of these actions. Greg's jaw tightened. His hands resting on the table in front of him curled into fists. His lawyer leaned toward him, whispering something urgent, but Greg didn't seem to hear. He just stared straight ahead at nothing. "Brandon Cole," Judge Whitmore said, turning her attention to the younger man, "is found guilty of forgery and fraud. While the evidence suggests you acted under the influence and manipulation of your biological father, you are not absolved of responsibility. You participated knowingly in the forgery of Mr. Morrison's signature. You were part of the conspiracy to commit fraud. You made choices even if those choices were made under pressure." Brandon's head dropped. His public defender put a hand on his shoulder, but Brandon didn't look up. He just sat there, shoulders hunched, looking like a man who had finally understood what he had become. "Rachel Foster," Judge Whitmore said, and when she did, Rachel looked up, her tear-stained face braced for the worst, "is found guilty of forgery under duress. The evidence presented today demonstrates that you signed Mr. Morrison's name on a legal document without authorization. That is forgery, and there is no way around that fact. However, this court also recognizes that you acted under coercion. Your son threatened to leave you. You were afraid of losing him. That fear does not erase the crime, but it does mitigate the severity of your culpability." Rachel was crying silently now, her head bowed. "Given these circumstances," Judge Whitmore continued, "this court finds you guilty, but recommends significant leniency at sentencing. You will be required to attend counseling. You will be required to understand the consequences of your actions. But this court does not view you in the same light as the men who manipulated you." Judge Whitmore's gaze swept across the courtroom. When it landed on me, she held it for a moment. "I want to acknowledge Mr. James Morrison's integrity in pursuing this case," she said. "It would have been easier to let this matter slide. It would have been easier to protect your family by staying silent. But you came here and told the truth. You protected the rule of law even at personal cost. That takes courage." I felt something loosen in my chest. I hadn't realized how much I had needed to hear that. "Sentencing will be determined at a hearing scheduled for March 15th, Judge Whitmore said. "At that time, I will announce the specific sentences for each defendant. However, I am ordering that Gregory Nash remain in custody pending sentencing. He is a flight risk and a danger to the community." The bailiff moved toward Greg. He stood slowly, and as he did, his hands were placed behind his back. The handcuffs clicked into place, a sound like a lock, turning like a door, closing like finality. Greg didn't resist. He didn't plead. He didn't cry out or rage against the sentence. He just stood there, perfectly calm, perfectly cold, and turned to look at Brandon. For just a moment, maybe half a second, their eyes met, and I saw something break in Brandon's face. Not relief, not vindication, not even fear, just the terrible dawning knowledge that he had been used. That the father he had tried so hard to connect with the father he had committed crimes for had never cared about him at all. Greg had used him as a tool, and now that the tool was no longer useful, he was being taken away. Brandon's shoulders shook silently as Greg was led out of the courtroom by the bailiff. Rachel watched her son cry, and the agony on her face was almost unbearable. She reached toward him, but the bailiff was already ushering her toward the exit. She didn't look at me as she passed. She couldn't. Judge Whitmore stood, and everyone in the courtroom rose out of respect for the office, even if not for the individual. When I stood, I finally allowed myself to breathe. The verdict was in. The truth had won. And for the first time in months, I felt the weight begin to lift. The sentencing came down on a cold March afternoon. Judge Helen Whitmore read each verdict with the same measured tone she'd used for the trial. Gregory Nash. 15 years for conspiracy wire fraud and identity theft. The judge cited his premeditation, his manipulation of his own son, and the systematic nature of his crime. Mr. Nash, she said, looking directly at him, you did not make a mistake. You made a choice. Every single day you chose to pursue this course of action, and the law holds you accountable for that choice. Greg didn't react. His face was stone. Brandon Cole, 4 years for forgery and fraud. The judge acknowledged the coercive circumstances. Your father manipulated you. She told him directly, but also made clear that he'd had choices. You are not absolved of responsibility, Mr. Cole, but this court recognizes that you were also victimized by the defendant, Gregory Nash. Brandon wept in the courtroom. Real tears, the kind that come when you finally understand what you've done and what was done to you. Rachel Foster, probation and community service. The judge's recommendation for leniency had been taken seriously. Ms. Foster, you made a grave error in judgment, but you did so under coercion from someone you loved. This court does not find reason to incarcerate you. However, you must understand the consequences of your actions and commit to rebuilding the trust you've broken. Rachel nodded. She was pale, hollow-eyed, but there was a kind of clarity in her expression. The clarity that comes from finally admitting the truth. As for me, my name was cleared. My business was protected. My reputation, while damaged, was restored by the truth. The court recognized my integrity in pursuing the case. Judge Whitmore even said so in her closing remarks. Mr. Morrison demonstrated that integrity is not abstract. It is a choice made every single day. And sometimes that choice costs us. But the law exists to protect those who make that choice. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel triumphant. I just felt empty and grateful and impossibly tired. The next day, I returned to my restaurant. The wooden table had been brought back from the courthouse. It was evidence no longer. I'd arranged for it to be delivered to the restaurant. It sat in the dining room where it had always been, but it felt different now. Not haunted. Just marked by everything that had happened. I closed the restaurant to customers that day, locked the doors, and I sat down with furniture polish and a soft cloth, and I tended to that table like it was a living thing. Every scratch, every place where the finish had been damaged or dulled. I worked slowly, deliberately, using the same technique my father had taught me 40 years ago. Let the wood breathe. Don't force it. Let the finish come back gradually. It took 4 hours. When I finished, the table gleamed under the restaurant's soft lighting. It looked almost new, but not quite. The history was still there. You could see it if you looked carefully. The marks and scars that meant something. The evidence of age and care and time. I pulled out a chair and sat down. For a long time, I didn't move. I just sat there in the silence of the empty restaurant, my hands on the polished wood, and I felt something settle inside me. Not healing exactly, not forgetting, but something like acceptance. The table was mine again. The restaurant was mine again. My name was mine again. He's just maintenance, Brandon had said that night. Those words had cut deeper than any physical blow could have, but I wasn't maintenance anymore. I was James Morrison, 56 years old, the man my father had raised to understand that integrity isn't negotiable, that loyalty means something, that legacy isn't just about tables or restaurants or money. It's about the person you become and the values you stand for. I thought about my father in that moment, about the way he used to call me Tommy when I was a kid, before the weight of the world settled on my shoulders, before I understood that sometimes love meant saying no, before I learned that protecting people you care about sometimes means letting them struggle. I understand now, Dad, I said to the empty room. I finally understand. And I sat there in my restaurant alone at my father's table in the light of the lamps I'd hung in the space I'd built with my own hands. And for the first time since Thanksgiving, for the first time and longer than that, really I felt peace. It happened on a Thursday evening in early April. The restaurant had closed. The staff had gone home. I was counting the register when I heard the knock on the door. I almost didn't answer. In the month since the verdict, I'd become cautious about unexpected visitors. But when I looked through the window, I saw Rachel. She looked smaller than I remembered, hollowed out. Her hair was pulled back in a way that made her face seem exposed, vulnerable. She was wearing a coat that hung loose on her frame, and her hands were trembling even before I opened the door. I almost closed it again. But something in her eyes, a kind of desperate clarity, made me pause. "James," she said. "Please, just 10 minutes, that's all I'm asking." I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I just stepped aside and let her in. We sat at the bar, not at the wooden table. I wasn't ready for that. I might never be ready for that. Rachel sat on the stool with her hands folded in her lap, and for a long time she didn't speak. She just cried. Not the theatrical, performative tears I'd seen at trial. These were the kind of tears that come when you've finally stopped pretending and can only tell the truth. "I don't know where to start," she finally said. "Start anywhere," I told her. She took a breath that seemed to require all of her strength. "I knew," she said. "When Greg came back, when he started talking about the restaurant, about how unfair it was that you had it and he didn't, I knew something was wrong. But I didn't want to know. Do you understand that I didn't want to see it?" I didn't respond. I just waited. "Brandon was so angry with you after you refused to give him the money," Rachel continued. "He barely spoke to me for weeks. And when Greg showed up, it was like Brandon finally had someone who understood his anger, someone who validated it. And I was so grateful for that, James. I was so grateful that Brandon wasn't alone in his anger anymore." She looked at me, and her eyes were full of shame. "But that gratitude came at a cost," she said. "It cost me my integrity. It cost me my marriage. It cost me my son's future." "Where is Brandon?" I asked. "At the facility upstate," Rachel said. "He writes me letters. They're angry at first, angry at Greg, angry at me, angry at you. But lately," she trailed off. "Lately, they're just sad. He understands now what Greg was doing. He understands that his father never cared about him, that he was just a tool." I thought about Brandon sitting in a cell, understanding that truth every single day. Part of me felt nothing but vindication. Part of me felt sorry for him. "Why did you come here?" I asked. "Because I needed you to know," Rachel said, "that I know what I did. Not intellectually, not in some abstract way, but in my bones. I know that I signed your name because I was afraid of losing my son. But I also know that fear isn't an excuse. It's just an explanation." She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. "I've been in therapy," she said. "Court-ordered, but also I chose to keep going. And my therapist asked me something that I haven't been able to stop thinking about. She asked me, 'What do you want Rachel Foster to be known for?' And I realized that I didn't want to be known as the woman who forged her husband's signature. I didn't want to be known as the woman who let her fear dictate her choices." Rachel stood up. She was still trembling, but there was something steadier about her now, something that looked like resolve. "I can't undo what I did," she said. I can't give you back the months of hell you went through. I can't restore what we had, but I can tell you that I see what I did now, fully, without excuse. And I'm sorry, James. I'm genuinely deeply sorry. I didn't know what to say. I'd imagined this conversation 1,000 times over the past months, and I'd never known what I would feel when it actually happened. What I felt was tired, sad, and strangely, a little bit of compassion. I believe you, I said finally. Rachel nodded and fresh tears came, but these seemed different, cleaner somehow, like she'd been waiting for someone to believe her about her own remorse. I'm leaving Iowa, she said. I've taken a job in Denver. I'm starting over, and I know I have no right to ask for anything from you, but I'm asking anyway. Please don't think of me as the villain of this story, because I'm not. I'm just a woman who made terrible choices and is trying every single day to become someone better. She walked to the door. She didn't ask me to respond. She didn't ask for forgiveness. She just left. And I sat there at the bar in my restaurant in the silence of the closed dining room, and I thought about what she'd said. I thought about fear, about the choices we make when we're afraid, about the difference between explaining something and excusing it. And I thought about the possibility of redemption, not absolution, but the harder work of becoming someone new. Rachel hadn't needed me to forgive her. She just needed to say what she'd done and to mean it. And in that, I realized she'd already begun the long work of rebuilding herself, which was all anyone could ever really do. I sat alone at that table for months, not every day. I was working managing the restaurant, rebuilding what had been broken. But at night after closing, I would sit at the wooden table and just exist. Let the weight of the season settle. Let the quiet do its work. The restaurant business goes on. People need to eat. They need a place to gather. They need to feel like they belong somewhere. So I showed up. Every day I showed up. Not because I was running from anything anymore, but because I was running toward something, toward the life my father had always believed I was capable of living. And then one morning, in late May, a young man walked through the door. His name was Matthew Sullivan. He was 22 years old, with an eager face and hands that knew what it meant to work. He'd heard about the restaurant from a friend. He was looking for a job. Not just any job, he wanted to be part of something real. I hired him on the spot. There was something in the way he moved, the way he listened, the way he didn't assume he knew more than he did. He reminded me of someone. Maybe myself decades ago. Maybe my father. Maybe just the version of any young person who still believed that hard work and integrity could mean something. One afternoon after the lunch crowd had cleared, I asked Matthew to sit with me. I want to tell you about this table, I said, running my hand across the wood. Matthew looked at it carefully, like he was trying to see what I saw. My father built this with his own hands, I continued. He was a restaurant man like me, spent his whole life in kitchens and dining rooms, learning what it meant to care for people through food and service. And when he died, he left me this table. Not as furniture, as a responsibility. Matthew listened without interrupting. That was good. That meant he understood that listening was a form of respect. For a long time, I said, I thought the table was about ownership, about having something that was mine, about proving that I was capable of building something my father would be proud of. But I was wrong. I paused, gathering the right words. The table isn't about owning something. It's about honoring something. It's about understanding that legacy isn't passed down through blood or inheritance. It's passed down through the values you choose to live by, and the people you teach those values to. Matthew was looking at the table now like it was sacred, which I suppose it was. This table, I said, has seen a lot of things. Good things, hard things, painful things. But it's still here, still strong, still able to hold people who come to it with respect and honesty. I stood up and gestured to the seat across from me. "Sit," I said. "Sit at the head of this table." Matthew hesitated like he didn't quite understand the magnitude of what I was offering. "Sit," I said again, gentler this time. "You've earned it." He sat. And in that moment, I saw something I hadn't expected. I saw my father's legacy moving forward. Not through me, not through blood, but through a young man I'd known for barely 2 months. A young man who understood that a table, a name, a promise, these things matter. "Your name is your promise, James," my father used to tell me. "Protect it. Because one day, someone will be watching to see if you do." I'd spent so much of my life trying to understand what he meant by that. I'd thought it was about legacy, about dynasty, about something grand and lasting. But sitting across from Matthew at that wooden table, I finally understood. It wasn't about dynasty. It was about integrity. It was about the choice I made every single day to be someone worth watching. To be someone who could teach another person what it meant to stand on their own 2 feet. To build something. To protect their name. To understand that respect is a two-way street. You get it when you give it. "Matthew," I said, "you're going to do great things with your life. Maybe here, maybe somewhere else. But wherever you go, remember this. Your name is your promise. Protect it. Because someone will always be watching to see if you do." Matthew's eyes were bright. He understood. Not perfectly. Not yet. But he understood enough. And I realized in that moment that my father had been speaking to me across 40 years. Through me, he was speaking to Matthew. And one day, Matthew might speak these words to someone else, and the chain would continue. Not because of blood, not because of restaurants or tables or money, because of integrity, because of the choice to matter. The door to the restaurant was open. The evening light was coming through the windows, soft and golden. The table gleamed beneath it, marked by time and care and the weight of everything that had happened. "You're not alone at this table," I told Matthew. "You're never alone, because every person who sits here, every person who understands what it means to protect their name and their word, they're all here too. All the people who came before, all the people who will come after." Matthew nodded slowly. I could see it settling into him. The weight of it, the beauty of it. And I thought about my father. I thought about Brandon and Rachel and Greg and the mess that had almost destroyed everything. I thought about the court case, the verdicts, the long journey back to this moment, sitting at a wooden table with a young man I barely knew, passing along a legacy that had nothing to do with blood and everything to do with choice. "Thank you for telling me this," Matthew said quietly. "You're welcome," I said. "Now let's get back to work. This place doesn't run itself." He smiled. And we both stood and we moved back into the rhythm of the restaurant. The kitchen sounds, the voices of the other staff, the beautiful chaos of a place where people came to be fed and cared for. But something had changed. Something had shifted. The table was no longer mine alone. It belonged to all of us. To everyone who understood that a name was a promise, that integrity wasn't abstract, that legacy wasn't about what you left behind when you were gone. It was about what you built while you were here. And to anyone reading this who has ever sat at a table and felt alone or unwelcome or unseen, you are not alone at this table. You are not alone. Your name is your promise. Protect it. And one day, you too will have someone sitting across from you, listening, learning, understanding that the greatest legacy we can leave is not our things, but our values. Looking back at this story, I realize it's not just my story. It's a warning about family drama that destroys everything. I made choices that hurt the people I loved, and I can't take them back. So let me be clear. Don't be like me. Don't wait for everything to fall apart before you understand what matters. I refused Brandon because I believed he wasn't ready. I was right about that. But I forgot something crucial. I forgot to show him why. I forgot to sit with him and explain, to guide him, to love him through the struggle. I hid behind my father's legacy instead of building my own relationship with my son. This family drama could have been prevented with honesty and compassion. That's the lesson my father Henry actually taught me, the one I finally understood in court. Your name is your promise, James. Protect it. But protecting your name doesn't mean destroying your family. It means living with such integrity that your family wants to follow your example. It means teaching, not punishing. It means love with boundaries, not boundaries without love. By God's grace, this story didn't end in tragedy. The truth came out. Justice was served. But so much pain could have been avoided if I'd simply been honest earlier. If I'd trusted God instead of my anger. If I'd remembered that God calls us to forgive 7 times 70, not to keep score. The family drama I created nearly destroyed everything. If you're facing a similar choice, remember this. God doesn't call us to choose between truth and love. He calls us to do both. Speak truth with compassion. Set boundaries with grace. Hold firm to your values while holding space for those you love. That's the path I should have taken. Thank you for staying with me this far. Leave a comment. What would you have done differently? Is there really a way to win in family drama without losing everyone? I want to hear your thoughts, because maybe your wisdom can spare someone else the pain I endured. And a heads up. The story that follows contains some fictionalized details created for educational purposes. If you'd prefer different content, feel free to step away, no judgment here.